Producers, in this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get started with Excite Audio's brand new synth, Evolve Alloy. But before we jump in, let's listen to a few audio examples of this incredible synth in action.
I cried last night. I fell down. You said I had no place in your life. Don't push away. Don't be so rude. I break all the rules for you.
Okay, Evolve Alloy, on its basic level, plays back samples or synth tones when you use your keyboard. There are 4 different sound layers, and those layers can be bypassed or turned off using the layers icon in the top left of each one of the modules. The great thing about the layers is that each layer is exactly the same. So once we understand one layer, we'll understand all 4, and then we can move from there. Each sound layer has either a sample player or a synth oscillator. Let's start with samples. If I come here where it says no sample, click there, I'll come into Evolve Alloy's sample library that comes when you buy the synth. We've got multi-samples, textures, tune foley, and then sort of the more typical synth samples and even acoustic sounds. So let's go ahead and choose one. And there we go. Now, I just want to stop right here and let you know that you can drag and drop a sample into Evolve Alloy. We'll do that at the end of this section. Once I have a sample loaded and I can play along my keyboard, I have some options. I can pitch it by semitones. If I double click anything that I've changed, it will set it back to its default value. I also have fine control as well, which can go plus or minus 100 cents. Double click, set it back. The tone control acts like a tilt EQ, where it will, to the right, reduce low end and increase high end. And to the left, it will increase low end and decrease high end. It's just a very helpful way to sculpt the sound quickly. We also have our normal pan control. Velocity sensitivity will allow you to control how loud a sample is, depending on how hard you hit your keyboard or how much velocity you have programmed into your MIDI clips. 100% will pay exact attention to it. 0 just says no matter what, you want it to always play at the same level. That level is indicated by the volume control over here. One other thing to point out about the sample engine is that we can play the sample from left to right, which is its normal way, or we can play it in reverse by hitting right here. And this little keyboard, when active, says pitch the sample while you play different notes on the keyboard. And if I turn this off and then hit different notes on the keyboard, it will play back at its original pitch every time. This will be helpful for things like textures that you don't want to be pitched or tuned to whatever notes you're playing. Let's go ahead and bring in a sound. Perhaps I want to bring in this 808 heavy E. If I drag it in, I can rename it, but I'm just going to keep the original name. And then I need to change the root note to whatever the sample says. You can see here it says E. That's pretty standard. I'm just going to bring it up to E. And now I import. And now if I play that, not only can I play it, but it will be transposed perfectly over the keyboard because we set that root note. That's samples. The synth, on the other hand, generates just like any analog modeled oscillator, and we have a number of different shapes to choose from. And the cool thing that I like about this synth is you can slide and morph in between them rather than just clicking. Of course, you can click and jump to any one of the shapes, but I really like this effect, and this can be modulated, and perhaps we'll do that later in the video. And just like before, we have pitch, fine, pan, velocity sensitivity, and volume as well. We also have the ability to detune and increase the unison. So we can get some really wild and wide sounds that way. Next, let's talk about the XY pad here in the middle. First of all, there are two states of the XY pad. One is the layers and one is the effects. We'll get to the effects when we cover the effects later in the video, but for right now, let's stay on the layers. What this allows us to do when we have any number of sounds loaded or created in the layers is mix between them by using this slider here in the middle. If I double click, it will set it right to the exact center of the XY pad. This means that each one of these will be played at the same velocity or the same volume, dependent on how we have the volumes tweaked here on the individual layers. This is what the sound sounds like out of the gate. Pretty great. Now let's press that same note and move the XY position all the way over to A. So you can see I'm only getting the sound from the A layer. It's a pretty simple concept, but incredibly powerful and easy to get the right balance of these four different sound layers. Evolve Alloy comes with a large library of presets that are professionally designed to showcase the power of the instrument. Now, I just want to point out that I am using a pre-release build of this synth. On release, it should have 250 expertly crafted presets. If I click right here, I can see what sort of presets I have at my disposal. I've got bass, bells, experimental, effects, keys, leads, pads, plucks, and textures. Now, any of these can be favorited, and then you can see your favorites here, and you can also save your own presets over here as well. Now, another really powerful feature of Evolve Alloy is the Randomizer feature. We've got this die out here, and it's more than just you click it and things get randomized. Depending on how far along this slider you click, more or less randomization or drastic randomization will happen. So if we've got a sound, let's find one. Let's come into the bells, waterfall bells. We kind of like this, but we want a little bit of a tweak. We can just click right here. If we want a big tweak, we can click all the way over here. That's crazy. Now, even further, if we click right here, we can choose what to randomize. So let's say we really like the effects and we want sound C and sound D to remain the same. Now, if we click this, all of those will not be randomized and everything else will be. What a cool sound. The next thing I want to draw your attention to are these four main macro effects that are custom made for this type of synthesis and sound design, where we have metallic sounds, we've got synth oscillators, and even organics, which we can manipulate. These have been custom made, they're multi-effects, and I think you're really going to enjoy them, and they're just a quick way to get more out of Evolve Alloy when you're designing your sounds. Before we jump into that, I want to come up here to this little hamburger window and come down and turn on Tooltips. If you're new to Evolve Alloy, this is going to help you understand every one of the parameters. As I hover over it, it will let you know what each parameter does. For these multi-effects, it will also tell us a bit about each of them. So this, for Sharpen, it simultaneously increases the attack of the transient and reduces the sustain. So if we're looking for more punchy, this is what we want to use. So you can really hear that the transient is a lot more dynamic. It's a lot louder, and then the sustained portions of that patch are really pushed down. So we're getting a lot more of a pluckier sound here. Rust will add distortion and grit to the audio. So let's dirty the sound. It's already pretty clean. Instantly can hear it. Really transforms a nice, calm, pleasant bell into almost something electronic. Love it. The Vibrate adds a short delay to the audio. So I'd say at shorter amounts or less value here, we're going to get almost a chorusy effect. And up here is where we can actually start to hear the delay, and it's really adding in a really nice texture to the sound. And finally, we have Spring, which is a characterful spring reverb, which we can add to the patch. I really like the fact that they went with a spring reverb here, because obviously a spring reverb uses metal to create the reverb, so it's just going to add more to that metallic side of things when we're designing sounds inside of Evolve Alloy. I'm going to remove the tooltips now, so I'm just going to come back to the hamburger menu, turn those off, and let's continue on with our deep dive into Evolve Alloy. For the next part of this tutorial, we're going to go into the Edit or Advanced panel inside of Evolve Alloy. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up inside of my DAW and hit the Edit tab right here. Here we're going to find the filter system, the effects inserts, the limiter, and the modulation section. Let's start with the filter. We've got two filters built in to Evolve Alloy, and we can route any one of the sound layers to either of the filters just by activating them right here. So right now, this filter, filter 1, isn't going to affect any sound. If I wanted to affect all of the layers, I can activate all 4 of these buttons. Or if I just wanted to affect some of the signal, like perhaps bypassing sound layer A and B, we can do that as well. If I flip over to filter 2, we can now perhaps affect A and B with just this filter. Now, one of my favorite features of the Evolve Alloy filtering system is the drive control. It just adds subtle saturation to the filtered signal. So that's it clean on A and B layers. And that's it affected. And if I really open up this filter, you can really hear the difference it does. We also have a mix control. Additionally, we can send the output of filter 1 into filter 2 and get some really powerful results with just this simple filtering system. From there, we have 3 effects inserts. These can be reordered by dragging and dropping, And we have a number of different effects to choose from: saturation, feedback, bit crushing, delay, reverb, compressor, transient, modulation, phaser, auto-wah, speaker, width, noise, EQ, pitch drift, and filtering. Now I'm going to leave you to experience those and test those all on your own, but each one comes with its own parameters to choose from. For example, saturation, we have tape, tube, and fuzz with drive, tone, and mix controls. Auto-wah has amount, rate, and mix. And we can, of course, sync it if we wanted to. Delay, we have two different delay types, stereo and ping pong, which we can also sync. We can also decouple the left and the right to get some really cool results. We have feedback and a mix control as well. From there, we have a limiter where we can adjust the overall output and release time of the limiter itself. I will note that this comes before the overall gain stage here at the end of the plugin. So if things are too quiet after that limiting, and this isn't working, you can always come up here and boost the signal. Now, we're not quite done with effects yet. If you remember earlier in the video, if you've been watching the entire way, we have the layer XY pad, but I also mentioned we have an effects XY pad. And we're going to use modulation in combination with the effects and really anything else we want to assign parameters to this XY pad so we can really get some cool sound design functionality. To do that, we're going to use this part of the modulation. We will get into all of the other forms of modulation. We're going to start on the right and go to the left. I know that's not the traditional way, but it's the perfect segue. So I've got the XY pad X here. If I click and drag, I can drop this on most anything inside of Evolve Alloy. But let's keep it simple. Let's come to the mix of the delay. Once I drop that there, you'll see this little notification here. This means that we can add modulation. At the moment, there is none because we need to click and drag up or down to add the modulation range to that parameter. So if I set my ping pong delay at 0% and then take my modulation range and go from 0 to 100 and then use the effects over here, as I start from the left and go to the right, you'll see that that mix goes all the way up. And we can do that with any parameters we want. So let's use the Y. In fact, let's come in here and add maybe reverb. We've got hull, plate, and spring. I'm a big fan of plate, so let's add the mix of that. We'll bring this down to 0, go all the way up to 100, and now that will go as we go from the bottom to the top. And if I'm over here to the left, there'll be no delay and just reverb as I go up. And now, of course, I can mix between them. As we begin to add more parameters to this effects XY pad, you can see that we can get some really interesting results. Now, a couple of other things while we're talking about modulation before we jump into the other modulation options. If I double click this, it will set the parameters value back to 0. So there is no modulation happening. And then I can click in it like we did before. If I want to get rid of the fact that this has assigned modulation, I can right mouse click and get rid of that. Just something I figured worth pointing out. We have a number of different modulation capabilities, including our velocity and key tracking, our ADSR for each one of the sound layers. We've got 2 LFOs and 2 envelopes to choose from. I'm not going to go in and explain what each one of these is in detail, but all of the routing is exactly the same. For the LFO, I can put that on, let's put it on the ping pong mix. And let's just bring it up. Now you might be saying, why isn't it steady? And if that's because if you look on this preset here, the LFO has the amount set to a different modulator. And right now I don't know which one, but if I come up in here to the modulation matrix, I can look and you can see that ADSR D is assigned to the LFO1 amount. I can get rid of that if I want by clicking right here, and now I don't need to worry about it. So the modulation matrix is where you're going to come in if you're looking for more advanced options. We can set the different curve value here. We can choose the polarity. We can also set the amount here as well. And of course, this is where we can delete anything that we want. We can also add anything we want as well, and then just come in and choose it this way. But I find dragging and dropping to be a much easier workflow. One other note about the modulation, the ADSR are independent for each one of the sound layers. However, if I click right here, they will all be linked together. So if I want to then make sort of a long decay, short sustain bit, and by the way, we can also come in and make a curve here. That's just a quick way to link all 4 of the ADSRs together so we can just get the overall shape if we're looking for like a global ADSR. Depends on what sort of sound design you're doing, but it's helpful to know that it's there. Now, some of you may have noticed before that the XY pad actually has XY buttons right here. What these are for are mapping modulation sources to the XY pad. So of course I can come in and move this around manually, or I can do it by way of an LFO. If I drag that on and then increase the value, you'll see that it starts moving. And maybe I want to do this one over on the Y. Now, that can also happen for the effects, which will just be a different set. And of course, we can use whatever we want, maybe the envelopes. So really a lot of flexibility there, and you can only imagine what you can get into once you start modulating. And you can even modulate the modulators. Perhaps I want to modulate the LFO amount to the envelope. With the LFO selected, if I just click and drag instead of just click once and then see the envelope, I can simply drag that over here and then add that amount to it. So you can imagine the possibilities. Pretty endless. There's one final note about modulation that I want to point out. If we come over to the keys, we have the pitch bend option and the modulation wheel, which correspond to any MIDI controllers you have lined up. Of course, you can use them right here inside of this user interface as well. You can actually assign this to different effects or parameters inside of the modulation matrix. So again, if we come in and add here, we can come up to source and we can choose the pitch wheel or modulation wheel here. So once I have that, I can come in and say, filter 1 drive is set to the modulation wheel. And you'll see the amount over there. And if I come out and now I use the modulation wheel, you can see it happening. And the last thing I want to point out is the hamburger menu up here on the top right. You'll find a number of options for the more advanced users. For example, number of voices, legato can be off or on, glide time, you can adjust manually. The pitch bend, sort of talked about this. It's 2 semitones out of the gate, but of course you have flexibility over that. You can also change your global pitch of the synth. One of the more important ones that you might come in to be using are the macro effects routings. Can happen pre or post effects down here. So do you want these macros to, like the spring reverb, to happen before this effects chain or after? You can switch that right here. There's also eco mode if you find that for whatever reason your project is struggling because of CPU usage. You can turn that on and you'll just reduce the CPU's usage. And then the tooltips, which we already discussed.